Chapter 1. Gav Smith was part of the Imperial Guard. He was a guardsman, and this made Gav very happy. Gav liked being a guardsman because then he could do the will of the immortal God Emperor, and that was one of Gav's most favourite things to do in the whole world. Today it was Gav's turn to fetch the huge sack of potatoes from the food wagon and to peel them. Gav liked to do this because he also liked eating potato peel. The commissar said Gav was a good Ogryn because Gav did all the things that he was told to do. This made Gav very happy. The commissar was not like other commissars because he did not shout and shoot people for being scared of things like small spaces and the dark. This was good because Gav did not like small spaces, and Gav was scared of the dark because that was when nightmares came to get you, was in the dark. The commissar was Gav's friend. The commissar was not an Ogryn like Gav and was really smart and could read and write, and Gav could not do that because it was too hard. Not even the Sarge could read long words. But the commissar said that that was okay because Gav was better at killing Orks than he was. This made Gav very happy because Gav liked to be useful. "Do you want to help peel the potatoes, Bob?" asked Gav. Bob was one of Gav's friends. They had come from the same tribe on the planet Barakak. Gav missed his tribe. When the war against the Orks was over, he would be able to go back home, or if more than 10 years was over. It had been nearly 2 years, and they had nearly won. The commissar said this was because Gav and his friends were such good fighters, and that they were making the Emperor happy by killing nasty Orks. The commissar's name was Larikin von Kelfsatine, but he said that Gav and his friends could call him Ari if they wanted to, because they were all friends. "Yes, please," said Bob. Bob liked eating potato peel too. For breakfast it was mashed potato and mushy peas. Gav did not like mushy peas. Peas should come in a pod, and they should not be mushy. Gav had used to grow peas for his tribe. Gav missed his tribe. But he had such wonderful friends here as well. It was good to have friends, especially when you had to kill Orks. Gav killed Orks with a big las cannon. The commissar said it was a gift from the Emperor, so Gav kept it clean and shiny and made sure that he did not put it down somewhere and forget where. But sometimes he did. But then the commissar would come and tell him where he had lost it, and then he would tell Gav to not do it again. But Gav always did, even though he never meant to. This made Gav sorry. Bob killed Orks with a las cannon as well, but Bob did not lose his so much. Gav sometimes wished he was as good at not losing things as Bob was. The commissar did not have a big shiny gun like Gav. All Ari had was a small long-last rifle, but that was okay because the Ari was very small. Commissar Ari was very clever because had been everywhere and done everything. Once he had stood on a landmine and one of his legs was made of metal, and it went clonk when he kicked a stone. Gav was happy that his foot is not made of metal because it sounds cold. Bob liked having potato peeling contests with Gav. Gav kept on losing, but Gav did not mind because he was peeling potatoes for the Emperor. Gav loved fighting. He wished he was better at it. Whenever he sparred with Bob, he always ended up knocked out, but he didn't mind. He knew that Bob was helping him get better, and the better he got, the better Gav could serve the immortal Emperor. Gav hated the small tank he had to ride in. Every time he was called to serve the Emperor, he had to ride in that scary, dark place. But it was all right, because Bob was there, and he'd lead all the other Ogryn in a rousing chorus of "Da Emperor is the best." They only knew the chorus anyway, but it helped the dark, tight place seem less scary. The flashing lights always made Gav happy. That meant he was going to serve his Emperor. That meant the door would open and he'd be able to shoot his gun. Gav loved his gun. He loved when he fired it and the enemy died. He'd hold down the trigger and shout at the enemy, making them die in the name of his Emperor, his best friend Bob right beside him. He liked Bob. Bob was his best friend. Gav had fought all kinds of enemies of the Emperor. His favourite were the greenskins, because they seemed to like fighting as much as Gav did. He knew to go for the big ones, the one who was hitting all the others. It was a race to see who would kill the big one first. Bob usually won. If you killed the big one, the regular Orks would be easier to beat. The bugs scared Gav. They made him sick to his stomach, especially when he slammed the butt of his gun against their head and they blew up all over him. They smelled bad and tasted bad. You couldn't cook bugs, not even the stumpies could make them taste good. The pants stealers were the worst. Gav always made sure his belt was extra tight when he fought pants stealers. The humans who'd turned against the Emperor always made Gav extra angry. Why would they stop loving the Emperor? What did the Emperor do to them, except love them and protect them? Gav always loved killing bad humans. It made him feel good. Commissar Ari said that was good. Being angry against traitors was good. That made Gav happy. When Ari first told Gav that, he'd hugged Ari so hard he'd had to stay in the Medicae hotel for a week. The food was really good when Gav visited. Gav had only faced the metal heads once, but he knew that he never wanted to do it again. No matter how hard you hit them, they'd just get back up again. It wasn't fair. Every other enemy was kind enough to die when you showed them how bad they were. The metal heads were cheaters, coming back to life like that. Bob said that Ari said that his Professor Kane at the big school was scared of the metal heads. Gav didn't believe him. Commissars aren't scared of anything, and Kane is some kind of super commissar. He must melt metal heads with his eyes or something. Gav hated the elders. They were like shiny bugs. You'd almost get your hands on them and they'd slip through your fingers. Their little arrows hurt too. Bob was better at fighting elders than Gav. He'd back them into a corner and crush their mushy bodies with his bare hands. They break easy once you corner 'em. Bob would say shiny blood covering his uniform. That made Gav smile. He missed Bob. Bob always made him smile. Gav was there the day that Ari died. One day Gav and Bob and all their friends had gone for a walk. They were walking through a forest. Gav liked the forest because it smelled like home. Ari was walking at the back of them. He always did this to make sure none of them got lost. Gav once got lost. It had made him scared. Ari never got lost. He was really smart like that. But then an orc, all dressed like a tree, shot him. Gav did not see it happen. He could not stop it. The sound of Ari dying had warned them all. They had killed the nasty orcs with the big guns the Emperor had given them. But Ari was dead. They took him back to the camp to see if the flesh fixer could fix him. He tried, but Ari had already gone to the Emperor. This made the whole tribe sad. Everyone in the tribe liked Ari. Ari was smart. They dug a hole for Ari to sleep in. Bob was the priest of the tribe, so Bob said the death words over the place where Ari slept. The whole tribe wept. They did not weep for Ari because Ari was with the Emperor. They wept for themselves because they had been left behind. Losing Ari was bad. But losing Bob made Gav sadder than ever. Bob was the reason Gav hated demons as much as he did. He'd fought them before, and he'd found them all to be so confusing. Some of them were easy, charging or shambling forward with big swords or small daggers. They broke easy. The skinny ones were like Elder, but they made Gav feel weird. Look at them was like looking at a girl Ogryn after Gav had learned what they were for. But they broke easier than the redskin or rotting demons, once you could stop them from dancing. The last demons were the kind that took Bob. He hated them most of all. He hated their laughing at him. They'd surprised them after Bob and Gav had been leading their new commissar, Gav could never remember his name, into a church to the Emperor. Gav had a headache the whole time. They'd made the place bad. They'd broken statues of the Emperor and carved a weird flame all over the church. That's when the demons had attacked. They'd burned the commissar before any of Gav's group could react. They looked like water that had grown faces. Looking at those faces made Gav's nose bleed. Gav would never forget those faces. Bob rushed into the thick of things, like he always did. Bob was always that way, charging forward for the Emperor, killing his enemies. Bob was good at that. He was a good friend. The water demons were fast, really fast. They jumped back and burned Bob to a crisp, but Bob didn't die like the commissar. Gav sometimes felt bad that he couldn't remember the commissar's name. He hoped someone remembered the commissar's name. Bob caught one of the water demons with his hands and ripped it apart. It was pink before, and it had been happy, laughing. Now the two pieces were blue, and they weren't happy anymore. They attacked Bob and bit at him. The other tribe had started killing the other water demons, but they were too late. Bob's last words always made Gav sad. "I'm gonna miss the patata skins." Gav beat the blue water demons until he was slamming his hands into the floor of the church. He kept it up until he realized his hands were bleeding. He kept doing it until he realized he was crying. He kept crying until the general had found them. Gav still misses Bob. Bob was a good friend. Gav had never wanted to kill one of his friends. The general was a friend. But he wanted to kill the general once. He wanted to kill the general when he said that Bob needed to be burned. The tribe had their ways. Bob needed to be honored and buried like all good friends. But the general said that Bob's body was sick. That if they didn't burn it, that those water demons could come back. They burned Bob's body right there in that church. But not before Gav got his tribe together and gave him a short, proper funeral. Gav was Bob's best friend. His other tribesmen let him give the last words. Bob was a good friend. He liked to fight. He liked potato skins. He was a good soldier for the Emperor. Now he's with the Emperor. Then one of the general's friends burned Bob's body right there in the Emperor's church. Now whenever Gav peels potatoes, he thinks of Bob. It doesn't hurt as bad anymore. Now he smiles and remembers how good a friend Bob was. Bob always made Gav smile. Even when he was dead, he could make Gav smile. Gav couldn't eat another potato skin. It didn't taste good anymore. Gav remembered the day he found the bad man who'd brought the water demons to the world. He would never forget that day. It was a week after Bob had been burned at the church. Bob was a good friend. The bad man had made an entire planet stop loving the Emperor. He was one of the space marines that had stopped loving the Emperor. He was blue and gold and made Gav's head hurt when he spoke. Gav hated him more than anything he'd felt about before, except how much he liked Bob. The bad man had taken over one of the big churches on the planet. He was killing people to make more water demons. Gav wanted to stop him. He wanted to make the bad man pay for killing Bob. Bob had been such a good friend. Gav would make the bad man pay. A lot of Gav's human friends died to get to the bad man. The bad man had brought his friends with him. His friends killed a lot of Gav's friends. That only made Gav hate the bad man more. His fellow guardsmen slowly made it closer to the big church. Gav wasn't scared of his small tank anymore. He was angry. He would make the bad man pay. Foolish dullard, you hardly deserve to be considered sentient. The bad man used big words. His voice made Gav's head hurt. His eyes bled, but he continued to try to run towards the bad man. Gav's tank had been blown up, and a lot of his friends were dead. They'd been good friends, but not as good as Bob. Bob was Gav's best friend. Gav would make the bad man pay. The bad man was as big as Gav. He was standing on top of a big set of stairs, right at the entrance to the church. He made Gav's human friends die with lightning. And he laughed. Gav hated it when the bad man laughed. He wanted to make the bad man shut up forever. The bad man struck Gav with the lightning. It hurt. It hurt real bad. Gav almost stopped running up the stairs, but then he remembered Bob. Bob wouldn't stop running. Bob would keep going. Gav wanted to be like Bob. Gav wanted to make the bad man pay. Gav would always remember the day he walked with little godlings. The bad men in the blue and gold armor were hard to kill, and they used heresy and magic. That made Gav hate them. Gav heard whispering in his head. They whispered how he could have everything he ever wanted. But they had nothing he wanted. They had taken a friend from him. Gav roared at them, and the bad men had died when he shot them. They could not whisper to him. His mind was too full of the Emperor's love. But they were too hard to kill, and they kept coming back. But the Emperor had sent his children to help him. The Emperor had a lot of children, and they were all very strong. All of the Emperor's children were little godlings. Gav and the tribe fought with them. They were very hairy and had teeth that were just like Gav's teeth. They had armor just like the bad men, but it was grey and blue. Gav wished he could wear armor like that. When the war was over, the godlings in the grey armor gave gifts to the tribe. They said the Emperor loved them very much. Then they sang songs for the dead. Evolution has left you behind, scum. It's a pity you're too unintelligent to understand just how foolish you are. The bad man wouldn't stop talking. Gav swung his big fists at him, but the bad man was fast. Faster than Gav thought he should be. Gav was getting tired, trying to hit him. The bad man hit him with his big staff. Gav went flying into a statue of the Emperor, shattering it. He felt bad. He wanted to apologize to the Emperor for breaking his statue, but he couldn't catch his breath. His entire body hurt. He'd never hurt so bad in his life. The bad man was kneeling beside him. He grabbed Gav's neck and squeezed. "I pity you, poor creature. For this, you shall get the kindness of a quick death." Gav lifted himself up suddenly and headbutted the bad man. "You killed Bob!" he shouted. He grabbed the bad man by the throat and lifted him up, driving his fist into the bad man's stomach. "You killed Bob!" The bad man shot lightning at him, but Gav hardly felt it. He was angry. Bob was a good friend, and the bad man's demons had killed him. Gav would make the bad man pay. The bad man kicked and punched at Gav, but Gav wouldn't let go. His arms hurt from holding the bad man up. "You killed Bob." He tossed the bad man onto his stomach and jumped on top of him, grabbing his strange helmet and slamming his head down into the concrete, again and again and again. "You killed Bob! Slam, you killed Bob! Slam, you killed Bob, slam!" Gav was crying now. Bob had been a good friend. "You killed Bob!" Slam, the bad man wasn't moving now. "You killed Bob, slam." The bad man's helmet was leaking this strange powder. "You killed Bob! Slam, 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 slam!" He was still slamming the empty armor into the ground when the Emperor's grey children came. His skin was burned and blackened, his eyes were bleeding as he cried, and every bone in his hands were broken. But he'd made the bad man pay. Chapter 2, shorter, but it made more sense to me to keep this separate. In the name of the Emperor, I scourged the evil from my tainted flesh. Repentia Tala threw her arm back, bringing the arcoflog over her shoulder in a long, lazy arc. The electro-tips of the torture device scored across her flesh, lips drawing back over yellowed teeth in a hiss of held pain. Letting her arm go limp, she savoured the pain. Pain was a cleansing fire that washed the unclean and impure away. The besmirched sororitas was practically nude, kneeling on the cold steel floor of her naval transport's chapel. Her body was covered in bare strips of yellowed and ragged parchment. Blood-red ink listed her many sins and heresies, as well as the names of martyrs holier than she could hope to be. Her fellow Repentia had left after their morning 2-hour flogging had been complete. Tala remained. Her sins could not be expunged so easily. The pain had slowly subsided. She knew better than to constantly whip at her scarred back. The white-haired Amazon was an expert at pain. She waited between lashes so her new pain wouldn't fade into the old. Her sins clawed at her mind, bringing blood-stained tears to her aquamarine eyes. Slaneshi cultists had infiltrated deep into the bowels of an agri world, and her convent was the fastest to respond. With faith and fire, she and her sister expunged the pleasure-seeking heretics, driving them back deeper and deeper into their only permanent city. It was in that city that she found her damnation. She had been a proud sororitas then, her blood-red armor and holy bolter the only tools she required to dispense the Emperor's justice. During the purging of a gigantic Joy-Girl brothel, Tala had become separated from her squad by the collapse of a ceiling. Cut off from her sisters, she had to find another way out of the tainted building. The winding halls of the brothel held many delights for the mortal mind, murals depicting acts too debauched to contemplate, statues of almost unholy beauty, and a cloying, heady musk that invaded her nose and senses, whispering promises into her mind. The heat inside her started as but a mere flicker, but as she stumbled from one room to another, her sense of direction lost in the tainted brothel, it began to grow into a fire the likes of which she'd never experienced. She oozed in her suit of armor, breasts painfully sensitive against the harsh, cool metal of her chest plate. By the time she'd found her way out of that damnable place, she had been corrupted. Her breathing heavy, her eyes glazed, she stumbled into the open air through one of the back doors. The alleyway was dank and filthy, trash receptacle turned over and dirty children feeding from the scraps. One of her sisters, Marzia, rushed towards her from the entrance to the alley, relief written on her young face. Dear Marzia, with her flaming red hair and soft, pouted lips, the novitiate had barely uttered a sound before the corrupted Tala was on her, pressing a lecherous kiss to those tempting lips. Tala flogged herself again, hissing once more and remembering her mind's corruption in those moments. She had wanted to strip Marzia of her ugly armor and enjoy her flesh in ways she couldn't even conceive. Even with her faith, that deeply corrupted Joy-Girl house had corrupted her, and she would have raped the poor novitiate in that alleyway were it not for the appearance of the rest of her squad. 3 of them had to wrestle Tala from Marsia, and Tala had only stopped struggling when their leader cracked her forehead with the butt of her bolter. The Repentia raised her arm once more, meaning to flog herself again. A hard, calloused hand wrapped around her wrist, making her gasp in surprise. So intent on reliving her shame, she'd not even heard the other enter the chapel. Why pretty lady hurt herself? Tala turned and looked up into the innocent, ugly face of an Ogryn. Half of his face had been taken up by augmetics, a clear sign that he was one of the so-called bone Eads. He wore a sweat-stained white shirt and a pair of dirty brown pants, permanently unshined boots shifting about nervously. "You wouldn't understand, Ogryn. Now release me." Tala finally choked out, her surprise dulling to a soft, simmering anger. Stupid creature, interrupting her like that. Tala had never been one to fully accept abhumans. Ogryn were slightly more acceptable than ratlings for their unshakable, if uncomplicated, faith in the Emperor. The Ogryn released her as commanded, looking like a beaten dog who had been scolded by its master. Despite herself, Tala felt a small pang for being angry at the big brute. "You came to worship then?" she asked. The big brute nodded. "Yup." Tala shifted to the side and allowed the Ogryn some room to kneel before the large, golden effigy of the Emperor. The gigantic brute went to one knee next to her, washing her with that horrible natural smell that was unique to his species. "May da Chaos men be crushed by da Guard. In da Emperor's name, amen." The brute bowed his head before the golden statue, and Tala could only laugh softly in bewilderment. "That's it?" she asked, amused. She had memorized codex after codex of prayers, blandishments, and holy writ in her quest to become a sororitas, and to hear so simple a prayer delivered so genuinely was oddly disarming. The brute rose, his voice confused. "Yarp, what else is dare Tar pray for?" Tala could only shake her head in amusement. Perhaps this big brute had been sent by the father as an omen to show Tala what true faith looked like. Ogryn were abhumans, yes, but the simple devotion this one showed seemed more real than any of the scripture and verse she'd memorized. Not knowing why, she offered her name. "I'm Tala, Sister Repentia." The Ogryn raised his left hand in a salute, coming to some semblance of attention. "Gav Smith, Bone Ead, at your service, Sister." Chapter 3. "Let me see if I have this straight," the Commissar said, pulling his oculars off and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You want to buy an Emperor's Day present from one of the local vendors?" Gav nodded enthusiastically. He liked this new Commissar. This Commissar was old and wise. Gav never learned his name. He couldn't remember much, and what he could remember about Commissars was all about Ari. 10 years. It had been 10 years since Ari and Bob had died. If Gav had been a normal human, he would have been thrown by how quickly such a time had passed. As an Ogryn, he simply accepted it with the same simple, childlike worldview with which he accepted everything. "This wouldn't be a present for that sororitas I see you hanging around with every now and again, would it, Sergeant Gav?" The Commissar smirked a bit, his voice barely containing the amusement he felt. Gav shuffled his big, booted feet. "Yup, sir." He nervously gripped the edge of the Commissar's large desk, crimping the smooth metal. The Commissar didn't yell at him. He was a nice Commissar. Not Ari, but nice. The Commissar sighed and leaned forward. "You know, I could have you punished for asking something like this. I could construe it as insubordination. I could be angry, Gav." The Commissar always had to make things simpler for Gav. Ari never had to do that. He had always talked simple. The Commissar hadn't been angry, and had even decided to accompany Gav on his trip to the town. It was a great day, and Gav was happy. The planet they were on was near a lot of other planets taken by the Chaos Men. Gav was happy to have another chance to hurt the Chaos Men. They were the men who killed Bob. He'd killed that blue and gold godling, but he knew that there were more. Thanks to the metal parts in his head, he knew what that meant now. The planet was a great place. It was a place people went to have a good time. The town was all lit up for Emperor's Day, and the lights made Gav happy. He and the Commissar walked along the main street, weapons held at ease before them. The Commissar had told Gav that there might be Chaos Men on this planet, so they had to be prepared. Gav didn't mind. He liked his big gun. Having it around reminded him of the big guns Bob used to use. And besides, if there were Chaos Men around, Gav wanted to hurt them good before they could hurt him. "Would you get that filthy thing out of my shop? He's frightening away all the business and breaking everything." The shop owner was mean. Gav didn't want to break things, but the shop was just so tiny. Every time he moved, his elbow or the tip of his gun would touch something and send it clattering to the ground. The shop was full of statues. Little ones, big ones, some even bigger than Gav. Statues of the Emperor's godlings, of his fellow guardsmen. There were even a few statues of Ogryn. Gav turned when he heard the shop owner begin to yell again. The commissar was standing by the shop owner's counter, leaning against it. He smiled and nodded as the man continued to berate his big friend, before reaching down and unholstering his las pistol. He set the gun on the counter with a small clatter, never saying a word. Gav was glad the shop owner stopped talking. He was mean. It took Gav only a few minutes to find the right one. The simple-minded Abhuman didn't know why, but the small statuette seemed much more beautiful than the rest. "How much for this un?" He gingerly picked up the tiny statue, turning and knocking over 3 more on his way to the counter. The shop owner harumphed and looked down at the little statue. 20 thrones. "You'll take 5. The commissar set the large, gleaming gold coins on the counter and picked up his lapistol. "Come now, Sergeant Gav. We have to wrap that before you give it to her. Now, see here, you." The shop owner began, blanching when he found himself staring down the barrel of that standard-issue Cadian pattern las pistol. "My friend Gav is very set on giving this to a special someone. Think of this as an Emperor's Day sale." The commissar smiled and holstered his pistol. Gav liked the commissar. He was a nice man, not like Ari, but nice. They were barely out of the shop when the explosions started. Gav turned his large, bald head towards the center of town, his one fleshy eye going wide. A large corona was spreading up and up into the sky, turning the post-dusk sky into early dawn. He winced and held up a large, meaty hand as the flash became blinding, sending everything into stark relief. The commissar was yelling into nothing, a hand on his ear. Gav looked down at the little statue before opening one of the pouches on his belt and slipping it inside. He patted the leather pouch before readying his gun. "Follow me, Gav. We'll meet up with your tribesmen 2 kilometers to the east." Gav nodded, acting as if he understood what the commissar was saying, before taking off after the man, big booted feet stomping on the rockreep below him. The lights of the city flickered and then went dark, making what was once a joyous city dark and scary to Gav. But he was with the commissar, so that was all right. The commissar would know what to do. Gav was panting by the time they ran up to the frantic guard column heading into the center of the city. Groups of PDF, hastily drawn conscripts, and grizzled veterans ran about the towering Ogryn in a frenzy. Orders were barked, weapons were ready, and oaths were reaffirmed. Somewhere in the distance, another explosion ripped through the town. Gav found his tribesmen milling about near the entrance to a chimera. Chelt, a small man even by human standards, stood at the top of the mud-caked ramp with a bucket full of potatoes, calling to the shuffling Ogryn. "Come on, we got a ton more in here. Get on in." Gav came up behind his 3, 4, 5 tribesmates and prodded one in the back. "You heard, Chelt. Get in. We got Chaos Men to smash. First one to smash a Chaos Man gets a lot of potatoes." His tribesmen grinned and whooped and hollered, clambering up on ramp and unknowingly dragging a rather unwilling Chelt into the chimera with them. Gav didn't fear the dark, enclosed space like he used to. Maybe it was the metal bits in his head. Gav thought it might be because he knew he was going to be killing Chaos Men today. His anger was bigger than his fear today. The noise outside was getting louder and louder. Gav could make out men yelling, lasguns firing, and some sort of singing. Well, it didn't really sound like singing, but it was the only word the hulking Ogryn could give to the strange trilling sound that grew inside the cab. Suddenly the Chimera lurched around, pulling a quick 180-degree turn. It kicked up a billowing cloud of dust and debris as its tracks worked to keep the squat metal box turning. The lights began to flash as his squad readied their guns. "Further Emperor! Charge! Smash the little uns!" Booted feet stomped down the hatch, followed swiftly by the more light tone of Chelt's boots. Gav swiftly assessed the situation. The Chaos Men were over there, right in front of him. He pointed at them and yelled, "There they are! Smash 'em! Smash 'em for Bob!" None of his tribesmen now remembered Bob. They were all replacements for other losses they'd had in the 10 years since Bob's death. Gav still used that line every time they charged. It felt right. The Chaos Men were hiding behind broken cars and overturned boxes. They dressed funny, in a bunch of flashy colors and dresses. As he came closer to the line of Chaos Men, he realized that the singing was coming from them. They were laughing and giggling even as they were shot down, writhing in their own pools of blood as if they were having fun. Gav hit the line of Chaos Men like an oncoming train, barreling through them and sending the bad men flying. He'd forgotten to even fire his gun, he realized as he splattered a woman's head with the butt of that gigantic weapon. Oh well, maybe he'd get to fire it next time. The melee continued unabated, the bad Chaos Men rushing at Gav and his tribesmen, eager to get blown to bits by close-quarter blasted or smashed apart by the slab-like muscles of the Ogryn. Gav was slick with blood and other bodily fluids, his gun empty from how many of the bad men he'd shot. He killed with enjoyment, knowing that he was doing the work of the Emperor as he clubbed a young boy to death. Or was it a girl? It was hard to tell with normal humans, much less these Chaos Men. Gav grunted as he felt bullets slap into his back muscle, digging in slightly before that tightly corded musculature and hard bone stopped it from hitting anything vital. He turned and found himself staring down a great, hulking Chaos Man wielding a heavy stubber. The man was almost completely naked, and Gav found himself laughing as he saw the man had a great big breast on the right side of his chest. Experience the kiss of death. Blunted thing. The bad Chaos Man spat, pulling down on the trigger. He fired 3 shots, 2 missed, and 1 ricocheted off Gav's thick forehead before he screamed out in surprised ecstasy. From shoulder to hip bone, a great chainsword swathed through the Chaos Man, sending a great spray of arterial blood in almost every direction. The 2 halves separated and flopped to the ground, leaving Gav smiling as he straightened up. Standing there, heaving her monstrous chainsword onto her shoulder, was Tala, her blood-stained parchment clothing wafting in the breeze. "Hello, Gav," she said. "Doing the Emperor proud, I see." She smiled. Gav smiled too. It was going to be a good day. Fighting alongside Tala was a lesson in humility for Gav. She almost scared him. "In the name of the Holy Father," she'd yell as she and her squad of similarly clothed sisters charged through torrents of lass fire, Gav and his tribesmen following in their wake. Watching her sisters torn apart by heavy bolt of fire or instantly incinerated by Lascannons didn't seem to matter to Tala. If anything, she just ran harder, holding that large chainsword over her head and whooping like she was a demon herself. The Chaos Men were fighting to protect some sort of ritual in the center of town. Gav had heard some of the men yelling about it as they continued their frantic race towards the center of the city. Gav knew that whatever they were planning, it was definitely nothing good. 2 of his tribesmen had died, one with a hole punched through him by a Lascannon, the other swallowed up by scores of gibbering, giggling Chaos Men. Tala's squad was doing even worse, half of her original 20 members cut down before they'd reached the edge of Ground Zero. Gav had never seen such destruction before. It seemed as if everything in the center of town had simply ceased to be, replaced with scorched and blackened earth. The Chaos Men formed a tight ring around the center, fighting like the madmen they were to keep the Guard from derailing their plans. The fighting began to bog down when the Guardsmen smashed against the ring of those Chaos Men. Gav could see men and women in the uniform of the local police among the Chaos Men, as well as the PDIF, or what the Commissar called Retard Guard. Gav never really knew what that meant. He didn't think the Commissar would tell him even if he'd asked. A lemon rust tank barked its commanding voice not feet from Gav, deafening him momentarily as it spat death towards the men who'd stopped loving the Emperor. Gav raised his empty gun and yelled out as he saw a score of Chaos Men shredded by the gigantic impact, only to grimace as the gap was quickly plugged. "Gav!" He turned his head towards that feminine voice, seeing Tala standing atop the ruined, smouldering chassis of a chimera. He waved. "I see more of your tribesmen to the west. Let's join them for a final charge. By the Emperor, it is a good day to die." She raised her chainsword and ululated at the Chaos Men before hopping off the chassis and disappearing into the smog-choked night. Gav took off after her, wondering what she was so happy about. Tala hadn't been joking when she said she'd seen more of his tribesmen. If Gav could count that high, he'd have been able to count himself among 30 of his own tribesmen, as well as 10 Sisters Repentia and 20 Sororitas. This is where we shall make the breach. A tall, scar-ridden woman in a suit of golden armor yelled at the gathered flock, raising her crackling power sword high. Repentia, Ogryn, lead the charge and force a gap. We shall follow you into the breach. Gav was one of only 2 bone-eads left among the Ogryn Auxilia, so he and his counterpart, a happy-go-lucky sod named Jim, split the rest of his tribesmen into what amounted to 2 equal squads, give or take a couple confused in-betweeners. Tala and her fellow Repentia sent up a great cry. Gav and his fellow Ogryn raised the guns into the air and fired. Well, except Gav, though he yelled really loud, stomping towards the tightly packed line with Tala's screaming, whooping sisters in tow. The armoured sisters hung back, moving forward slowly, a few shooting grenades over the gaggle of berserkers and into the line of Chaos Men. Gav and Tala ran side by side, the Ogryn's loping, flat-footed gait matching Tala's swift, agile grace. She revved her chainsword and whooped, grinning ferally, her aquamarine eyes burning with purpose. The charge was only halfway through when a great boom sounded throughout the battlefield. Another explosion sounded from the centre of town, though there was no bright flash accompanying. Then the entire Chaos line fell down dead, grins of insane ecstasy locked on their rictus-frozen faces. The stink of burning flesh made Gav cough, slapping a paw-like hand over his nose. The sisters had taken immediate action, burning the bodies of the fallen Chaos Men in the tense silence following their sudden deaths. Nobody ventured past the circle of dead heretics, guards and sororitas alike frozen in confusion. Only the woman in the golden armor seemed to know what was going on, barking at the general and his friends to make ready a defense and secure the perimeter. What that meant to Gav was walking back away from what had looked like a fun scrap, that gun held over his shoulder and a look of confusion and mild fear crossing his face. Take heart, Gav. The Ogryn turned and smiled as Tala appeared beside him, chainsword held over her shoulder in a similar fashion. The fight is not yet done. The enemy is up to something behind the flames. I can feel it. She still had that almost scary smile on her face, despite bleeding from several places across her scarred form. "Ya all right, sister?" Gav spoke, leaning against the same Chimera chassis she'd launched from minutes before. He pulled his water canteen from his belt and popped the top, swigging the warm liquid with great wet gulps before wiping his mouth with his arm. Pain is weakness being purged from the body. She spoke, before her features softened somewhat. "I'm fine, Gav." She smiled and took the water bottle when he offered it, finding the liquid remarkably refreshing. She'd hardly known she'd been thirsty until the water had hit her lips, and now she almost drained the large canteen. Licking her lips, she handed it back. A moment of silence passed between them, a Booman and fallen battle sister standing across from each other. Tala's mind was reeling, thinking of the possibilities of what was going on behind that curtain of fire. Gav was trying to remember something. He had something to tell Tala, no, something to give her. What was it? "This is one fine Emperor's day," Tala commented, staring off into the roiling smoke rising from the burning cadavers. "Knows not," Gav responded, sarcasm failing to translate for him. "We got attacked and—" His fleshy eye widened for the second time that day as he clumsily reached for that pouch. "I got you something for Emperor's Day, sis." Gav had to clamp his hands over his ears, bending over double. A shrill call struck across the battlefield, wavering and ululating in ways that made men soil their undershorts accidentally. Gav stumbled and almost knocked Tala down, the Repentia also covering her ears and hissing as blood seeped from her nose. "They come! Contact! All over us! Emperor, help us!" Gav looked up to see figures leaping over the bodies of the dead Chaos Men. Skinny demons, hundreds of them, thousands of them. They danced and hopped towards the panicking guardsman line. Some rode two-legged things with long noses and even longer tongues. Others rode chariots or even flew with wings of their own. Gav furrowed his brow and hefted his gun. suddenly remembering that he had an extra clip of ammo clamped round his arse. Grabbing it and slamming it into place, he turned to Tala. "It's a good day to die, right?" He fired off a round towards one of those skinny demons, the spreading cone of shrapnel shredding the leering, lecherous thing. It vaporized as if it had never existed, a whispered sigh following in its wake. "In the name of the Father! Die! Die!" Tala swung her chainsword at one of the skinny demons, who just twirled out of range, giggling and smiling. The demon clicked its massive claws and danced forward, meaning to take Tala's head off. The Repentia was fast, raising the whirring teeth of her weapon to take off the hissing creature's claw with one deft stroke. Gav held one of the creatures by its neck, grinning at it, clawed fruitlessly at his slab-muscled arm. Raising his arm up, he slammed the thin, delicate thing against the ground again and again and again, until slick, blue-black ichor covered the front of his uniform, hissing and steaming the cool of the night air. "Scud day," he mused as he backhanded a trilling demon atop a mount, sending the silly thing flying over the burnt-out Chimera chassis. He didn't notice the several cuts across his body that the skinny demons had been making. He did start to feel a mite dizzy, though it certainly wasn't from blood loss. His skin felt a bit too hot, and for some reason the colours in the world seemed too hot. He winced as he felt a claw dig deep into his back, turning round to get at the demon, but grabbing onto thin air as it danced away, giggling at him. He hated that laughter. "I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with that request." When you fought the keeper of the four-armed daemon, what was going through your mind, Gav? What can you remember? Trailer leaned forward somewhat, looking up intently at that simple creature. Gav leaned back in his cot, his face screwing up with effort. I felt like I was burning up. The colours owed a world were brighter, but I was angry too. He nodded with certainty. That thing made fun of Bob. I wanted to peel its head. Trailer jumped as Gav brought his titanic fist down onto his knees. "Peel it like a patata, like me and Bobister do." Trailer laughed. "Good for you, Gav. That's the right way to feel about demons. Do you still feel hot sometimes? Do the colours around you still seem bright?" Gav laughed and shook his head. "No, though I sometimes get hot when they turn up the heat at night." Trailer nodded and stood. "Thank you, Gav. I think that will be all." She made the sign of the Aquila. Gav tried to return the gesture, but remembered that he didn't have that arm anymore. Trailer often found that when something seemed to be simple on the face of it, oftentimes something would come along to send you all the way back to square one. As she exited the hotel and walked the short distance towards the building, currently housing most of the top IG brass and herself, she felt her compad shaking at her belt. Pulling it free, she looked down to see the aging face of her counterpart from the Ordo Malleus, one strand threeness. "I hear you've been visiting Abhumans today. Wouldn't be that Gav Smith, would it?" Strand's voice was congenial on the face of it, but Trailer could sense that he was here to complicate her life. "Just left, in fact, on my way back to HQ." She offered no more than that, hoping her attitude would tell Strand to piss off where she couldn't. Though they held the same rank and held no authority over one another, Trailer knew to tread lightly where her fellow Inquisitors were concerned. "And what is your conclusion about the blunt?" Strand wouldn't be deterred from being a nosy bastard, of course, so Trailer resigned herself to whatever the man had in mind that would make her day harder. He's untainted, so far as I can tell. His captain vouches for him, and I've got corroborating evidence from Adeptus Sororitas and a member of the Space Wolves. I was considering sending him back to his unit. Ah, yes! Shame. I was hoping I wouldn't have to do this. Strand didn't look as if this bothered him in the least. "I received a transmission from a member of our chamber militant. I'm sure you've heard of them." Strand continued, heedless of any response Trailer had been mustering. "I've informed them of the Ogryn Gav Smith's encounters with the ruinous powers. It is in their educated opinion that he is too great a risk to be allowed to rejoin his unit. The taint of too great powers are likely within his veins." "I just spoke to him, and he seemed. Stran held up a hand to forestall her. I have no authority over you, but the Grey Knights are another matter entirely. I wish you no ill will, Trailer. For the good of yourself, do not put that Ogryn back in his or any other guard unit. Turn him into a servitor, set him free on the planet. I don't care, but disobey a command from the Grey Knights at your peril. The line went dead. Had it not been for the expense of that compad, Trailer would have smashed it against the cobblestone street. It wasn't like she cared for the Ogryn. Trailer hated being used, and hated it especially when that usury came from people who were supposed to be on her side. Trailer was in a foul mood as she sat behind her desk, that sheaf of paper held out before her. A simple signing of the bottom line could end Gav's life by a bit of poison. Another signature could turn him into a powerful battle servitor. And another could discharge him from the guard with full benefits, leaving him on this planet as they went off to face Abaddon thrice damned. None of the options on that sheaf of paper seemed to fit. Killing or mind-scrubbing Gav was a waste of good talent. Any Ogryn that could face a Chaos Sorcerer and a greater Daemon, even with help, was a greater asset than any battle servitor. Discharging him seemed like the best option of the three, but even that one set her teeth on edge. For one, the feeling of usury rankled every time she looked at that little signature line. For two, Gav seemed so damned eager to get back at the front line. She'd seen many normal humans after a great loss like Gav's Tala. Most of them were listless in their devotions, a deep feeling of abandonment settling over them. A few outright renounced the Emperor. Gav seemed impervious to such things, eagerly looking forward to the day when he could serve Da Emperor again. Keeping Gav useful, but maintaining her own autonomy became top priority to Trailer. She would not be dictated to, but she wasn't about to piss in the face of the Grey Knights by going against their will. The answer came to her as she poured her third glass of Amasec. It hit her like the force of a demon hammer, and with a grin she signed Gav's discharge papers. Leaving? Tears were welling in the Ogryn's big brown eye as he stared down at the stamped bit of paper. The guard had been his life. He'd fought beside Ari and Bob, then beside Tala. He'd seen so many other friends fight and die for the Emperor. This was his life. And now Trailer was sitting behind her desk and telling him that he wasn't going to be a guardsman anymore. Trailer held up a hand and patted the Ogryn's larger mitt. You've served the Emperor well, Gav, but your 10 years were up a long time ago. She didn't want the giant Ogryn bawling in the middle of her office. But I don't want to leave. What am I going to do for Da Emperor now? Gav felt scared, really scared for the first time in his life. This was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. The general wouldn't let this happen. Did I do something wrong? Tears flowed freely now. 'Cause if I did something wrong, I can just go to the church and ask for forgiveness and... Gav. Trailer's voice was calm and reassuring. She stood up and smiled her most ingratiating smile. Just because you're leaving the guard doesn't mean you've stopped being useful to the Emperor. Gav could only stare at her in worried confusion. Trailer pressed on. I do a lot of good work for the Emperor, all around the galaxy. My work is small, but it's very important. Sometimes it's very dangerous, and I need someone to protect me. She picked up another bit of paper and held it out to Gav. You can serve the Emperor again. By signing this bit of paper, you will be the personal bodyguard to an Imperial Inquisitor. She waited for a moment, then added, You'll be my personal bodyguard, Gav. You'll protect me so I can do the Emperor's work around the galaxy. Gav didn't know how to sign his name, so he just put a big, shaky X where his name should go. Trailer smiled and took the bit of paper back. Very good, Gav. She folded the slip of paper and tucked it into one of her drawers. Gav felt a weird tingling in his tummy. The world seemed to be rushing at him, making him dizzy. This was all happening too fast, and yet Gav had heard Ari talking about Inquisitors a long time ago. He'd said that they were some of the biggest heroes in the Imperium, that they could make sure entire worlds kept loving the Emperor, all by themselves. Trailer seemed too small to be so important, but if Ari said it, then it must be true. Trailer buzzed her aide into the room, the small man nervously edging around the Ogryn to stand before his boss. See to it that this Ogryn gets the best prosthetic arm possible. I want it to be able to hold some kind of gun so he can use another weapon with his good hand." She turned to Gav. "We're going to be leaving in a few days, Gav. If you have anything left to do on this world, I suggest you get it taken care of." She nodded to her aide, who turned to the Ogryn and began the slow process of ushering him out. Gav could only think of one thing he had left to take care of on this planet. The sensors that kept what used to be Tala's brain alive sent an electrical current through her broken body, bidding her to rise her head from her current tasks. "Hullo, Tala." Gav stood before the servitor that held the flesh of Tala. She was currently using a cleaning attachment on one of her arms to make one of the hallways of her home a bit cleaner. What was left of her mind bristled as how dirty everything was. "Hello, sir," came her response, her voice choked and hazy through the grill set into her broken, infected jaw. "How might I help you tonight?" Gav felt himself on the verge of tears once again, but he held them back with a force of will. Tala wouldn't want to see him like this. "I'm going to be leaving soon, Tala. They said I's no long part of Dar Guard." The cogitator in Tala's head searched for the appropriate response as she straightened and adopted the most congenial expression her cavalcade of augmetics allowed. "It was a pleasure to have you in our hotel, valued former member of the Guard. Arv Imperator." She bowed and straightened, looking up at Gav with that one still good aquamarine eye. Even now, the lack of proper moisture to her eye was giving it a milky film, blotting out what little intelligence had been left in that iris. Gav started, swallowing a sob that threatened. "I just wanted to say that you was important to me. You was one of my best friends, Tala." Gav couldn't stand it anymore. He turned and blundered his way past a group of guardsmen who cursed and brayed at his passing. The servitor who used to be Tala went back to her work as if nothing were happening. Only a few moments later did she notice a leakage around her fleshy eye. "Oi! Who's the new guy?" Shiksa didn't mind that she'd just lost her arm wrestling contest with Grint, Trailer's pet psyker. She liked to test her muscle against his warp-enhanced muscle. Right now, though, she was more concerned with the hulking behemoth that was ascending the loading platform into Inquisitor Trailer's personal ship, walking alongside the woman herself. "Settle down, Shiksa," Trailer responded. She was used to her demolitions expert's bravado. She was from Katakan, after all. Until Gav came along, Shiksa had been the biggest member of her crew at a good 6'6", with the muscle to back it up. Next to the hulking form of Gav, Shiksa looked like a little girl. "This is Gav." She reached up and patted the Ogryn's bionic arm. "He's going to be my bodyguard during my undercover operations. He's got the bulk for it, true enough." The voice that Rattling Trob used would have done better on a man twice his size. He was dressed in the comfortable clothing of his kind, his only military markings being the tattoos trailing up and down his strong little arms. The stumpy, bearded Abhuman hopped down from one of the crates he sat upon, shouldering his favoured weapon, the sniper gun most of his kind were so natural with, and looking up at the towering Ogryn with a grin. "Big boy, ain't he?" "He has a good soul," Grint spoke, his voice hazy and far away. What little of his face wasn't hidden by a heavy cowl looked no more than 15, one of his withered hands coming to rest on Gav's chest. "Better than most of the stunted ones you bring here, mistress." He smiled to Trailer under his cowl. Gav took all of this in with the same confused, innocent look he always had. Trailer had grown to like him in the few days she'd known him. With nothing better to do, the Ogryn had come to visit her once in a while, and in that time she'd learned just how intelligent he could be. Shiksa smirked, crossing her arms under her chest. She wore a white, armless top and a pair of camo pants, boots almost as big and grimy as Gav's covering her feet. She eyed Gav up and down, sizing him up. "You speak, big guy?" "Yes'm, can speak." Gav raised his left hand in a salute, and Shiksa could only laugh. "Wow, so polite. I think I like this Ogryn." She reached up and gave Gav's shoulder a hard smack. "At least I'll have someone to arm wrestle who won't cheat." Grint only grinned under his cowl. Gav smiled. The people Trailer had around her seemed like nice people, especially Shiksa. That smack against his shoulder had been strong. It even stung a little bit. Gav liked strong people. After he'd been shown to his quarters and introduced to the few remaining members of Trailer's crew, Gav sat in his own room and stared out of his viewing port. They were minutes away from embarking, leaving Manic behind forever. Ogryn aren't, by nature, a reflective species. They live in the moment and are much like Orks in that respect. Gav had lived to be an older age, comparatively. Most of his brethren died off before they saw their 20th year. Gav was nearing some part of his 30th, he couldn't remember which, and was gaining what others could call wisdom. He sat there as they began to take off, his body ignoring the G-forces that were being exerted upon it, and looked back on all his hard years of service to the Guard. He smiled, remembering the day Bob had started a food fight in their mess hall. Ari had been so angry. Ari. He remembered how Ari had tried to help Gav read. It had never gone anywhere, but Gav loved him for trying to teach him. His face softened when he remembered Tala. He remembered that moment just before the skinny demons had attacked, when they had shared his canteen and hadn't said anything. He'd done good things for the Emperor, but bad things had happened to him. He never made the connection most would. He never saw the Emperor abandoning him or questioned the Emperor's love for him. As Gav Smith sat there on his cot and watched the blueness of the sky fade into the darkness of space, he smiled. Wherever he went, whatever he did, he served the Emperor. And that was good.